Disney's 2021 take on Cruella was controversial from the start. People's reactions were wild when it was announced that the puppy murder obsessed villain is getting her solo live action outing. People were wondering if the iconic villain was going to get the quote unquote sympathetic villain turned anti hero treatment Maleficent got over the recent years. I admit, I was also questioning why, out of all people, are we getting a possible sympathetic backstory for someone who wanted to skin puppies to wear as a fur coat just for the heck of it? So many other villains have actual sympathetic backstories. Ursula. So, why Cruella? Well, I can't really answer that since I'm not a Disney producer and I doubt I'd be one after this video, but that's not what I'm here to do. What I am here to do, as late to the party as I am, is take a look at how Cruella's story actually goes against the punk subculture she's trying to co-opt. 2021 Cruella stars Emma Stone as the titular fashionable villain turned anti-hero, Emma Thompson as the Baroness, Joel Fry as Jasper, Paul Walter Hauser as Horace, Mark Strong as John McCree as Artie, Kevin Novak as Roger, and Kirby Howell-Batiste as Anita. The movie is directed by Craig Gillespie, who also directed I, Tonya. The screenplay is written by Dana Fox, who wrote For a New Girl, Tony McNamara, who wrote The Favorite and The Great, which I still have to watch, Kelly Marcel, who wrote Saving Mr. Banks and 50 Shades of Grey, Steve Zissou, who created and wrote Togetherness, and Aileen Broche McKenna, who wrote 27 Dresses and the iconic The Devil Wears Prada. Of course, Cruella is based on the character by Dodie Smith, who wrote 101 Dalmatians. Cruella is available to stream on Disney Plus, on Premier Access, which is 30 Canadian dollars more on top of your regular subscription. The price may vary according to your country's exchange rates and the prices that Disney put on there. Cruella, which is set in 1970s London amidst the punk rock revolution, follows a young grifter named Estella, a clever and creative girl determined to make a name for herself with her designs. She befriends a pair of young thieves who appreciate her appetite for mischief, and together they are able to build a life for themselves on the London streets. One day, Estella's flair for fashion catches the eye of the Baroness von Hellman, a fashion legend who is devastatingly chic and terrifyingly hot. But their relationship sets in motion a course of events and revelations that will cause Estella to embrace her wicked side and become the racuous, fashionable, and revenge-bent Cruella. Despite its aesthetic that borrows from the punk subculture, Cruella and her story actually re-establish the capitalistic and aristocratic institutions that the punk subculture heavily goes against, making the whole thing feel disingenuous. Like a stormy cotton candy. Pretty on the outside, all fluff on the inside. The word punk has been mentioned so many times in association with this movie, and it's literally set during the punk revolution, so before we dissect my opinion further, let's first explore what makes punk punk. Please note I am not a punk in any way, so the history I'm going to outline in this video is very broad and based on general information I collected from other people's research in the punk space. According to a Pitchfork article, punk is more than just a sound. It's a whole way of being, a philosophy, an attitude, and crucially, a look. Punk ideologies or principles are, in and of themselves, broad and a lot of them differ. Jesse Prinz, who is the director of interdisciplinary science studies at the City University of New York, wrote research about punk, mostly punk music, and its core characteristics or aesthetics. He says, given punk's diversity, there is no way to give an inclusive aesthetics of punk, but there are themes that are sufficiently pervasive to provide a prototype. He proposed 3 core ideals that are common in the punk subculture, which are irreverence, nihilism, and amateurism. Let's see how Cruella will measure up to the punk subculture based on these three common core ideals the research outlined. Punk amateurism manifests itself in the heavy do-it-yourself or DIY aspect of the subculture. The DIY aspect means people crafting their own looks or outfits, writing and promoting their own music, artwork, events, literature, etc. DIY is important to punk. One research participant in a paper by researcher Ian P. Moran said that the ethical domain of DIY punk culture can be summarized in that it is fundamentally made by fans for the fans. They also mentioned the importance of how the DIY ethic is extremely close to the political output of many individuals within the subculture. Because what's more political than refusing a conglomeration of dominant media outlets and releasing your own art? All this to say that DIY is important to punk because rejecting the dominant media or oppressive ideals is the very essence of punk, which values self-expression, especially in the 60s and 70s, which the movie is set in. The movie shows the DIY aspect of Cruella. Cruella uses her raw design talent, creativity, and seamstress skills to create all of her outfits, which are inspired by unconventional punk styles. Noting the torn garment looks, the use of a darker color palette, all leather or pleather ensembles, heavy dark makeup, etc. She also promotes her work herself by gatecrashing the Baroness's galas and sending her handmade gowns to the people attending the Baroness's grand gala at the end of the movie. It only makes sense since this is a movie centered around fashion. But the political aspect of DIY is lacking in this movie, so to speak, because the DIY scenes and the act itself aren't shown to be connected to a cause. It's connected to revenge rather than a social issue, as I'll explain further in this video. Punk's second ideal is nihilism. Nihilism in general is the philosophical belief that all values or ideals people believe in are baseless. Nihilistic themes include decay, despair, societal collapse, among others. Because punks saw themselves as part of the blank generation with no purpose in life and diminishing opportunities. Cruella saw herself as the future of fashion, and that seems like an optimistic thing, making the future positive and innovative rather than the pessimism that nihilism has. Cruella seems to shake up the fashion industry and society when she starts her gate-crashing and going against mainstream fashion ideals that the Baroness set, which I'll go more into later. But what weakens this supposed collapse of the elitist fashion scene is that we don't really see Cruella's impact to its fullest. While we see newspaper headlines like this say that Cruella is impacting the fashion industry and is taking over the Baroness and her standard, we don't really see fashion industry characters or even regular citizens adding more punk themes to their outfits. It wouldn't even take 5 minutes to show minor characters in leather jackets, tattered jeans, studded vests, mohawks, faux hawks, and all of those fashion items belonging to punk fashion. I can't really say much about punk fashion as I'm not a fashion historian, but these channels did amazing breakdowns of punk and fashion in the movie, and I highly recommend you watch their videos. But back to the point. It wouldn't have taken much time to show Cruella's bigger impact on fashion and society because that's part of the point Cruella's trying to make. Shaking up the fashion world could have been the societal collapse Cruella was aiming for and what punk's nihilistic nature might have aligned with. But because there weren't enough moments that showed Cruella's physical, visual impact on the fashion industry, this nihilistic part of punk doesn't feel earned and isn't present. The last, but certainly not least, core ideal of punk is irreverence. Irreverence in punk means challenging prevailing or mainstream or dominant social norms. Irreverence could also manifest itself in many ways, like attacking the prevailing political order or religion, NSFW norms, consumerism, and celebrity. To figure out just how irreverent or not this Cruella is, we first have to take a look at what dominant ideals she's going up against. Cruella is going up against the Baroness von Hellman. The Baroness is the ultimate representation of dominant ideals. How, you may ask? Well, society at large still values the rich and famous and takes lifestyle and fashion choices from popular influencers. Von Hellman is a baroness, meaning riches came to her because her ancestors were born lucky or got in a royal's good graces to be granted the title. That is what we call privilege, which is a right or immunity attached specifically to a position or an office. Britannica defines the baron title further. In the feudal system of Europe, which is the monarchical royalty system, a baron was a man, typically, who pledged his loyalty and service to his superior in return for a land that he could pass on to his heirs. The superior, sovereign, or royal, in his principality, held his lands of no one, quote-unquote, i.e. independently, and the baron was his tenant-in-chief. This practice was discontinued in England when King Edward I recognized the political and financial or fiscal dangers it posed. So basically, the privilege granted in this case is in terms of wealth associated with the position of being a baron/baroness. Wealth buys people a lot of things: education, businesses, and influence. The baroness is a wealthy woman. There aren't a lot of wealthy people in the world, but a lot of people do look up to the wealthy. Hence, the wealthy hold a lot of power to influence their followers and popular culture at large. Maybe not by direct command, but just by their sheer appearance, or whatever they do. Throughout real-world history, you can see how the wealthy influences society and culture, how people follow their styles and lifestyles, like how Anne Boleyn's headdress, Marie Antoinette's shift from panniers to chemise à la reine, the Kardashians' contouring, and Billie Eilish's neon hair and loose button-ups shaped fashion from the runway to everyday looks. It's no different for the Baroness in this movie. People look up to the Baroness. We can see that in the way paparazzi surround her at her galas. We could also see it in her fashion. Costume designer Jenny Bevan says the Baroness's look was influenced by Dior and she's slightly old-fashioned, a bit more 1950s and 1960s. Dior as a brand is associated with luxury, being expensive, and it has had a lot of history. So, using Dior as inspiration fits with the wealth and luxury the Baroness is portraying. Her style is classic and reflects the glamour of the 1950s through its clean cuts and silhouettes. All of these things make the Baroness an authority figure on fashion in the movie's world, especially as the head of a fashion house. We can see how her influence works while she's selective of who gets to be a designer in her house, how her staff and assistants are similarly dressed in classic styles from the 50s, and which designs make it for her runway show. So all this to say that Cruella is going up against the ideals of wealth, fame, and authority that dictates the mainstream. Now that we know what Cruella is going up against, let's finally define irreverence in punk. Irreverence means lacking proper respect or seriousness. As I've mentioned so many times before, punk aims to challenge prevailing social norms. Punk does that through irreverence, by using shock to attack the cultures or ideologies it's going against, minimizing their importance that way. For example, young Cruella customizes her uniform while at school, which is a shock to the school officials. This is actually a good way to show young Cruella's punk rebellious nature because uniforms have always been a symbol of unity and authority. Uniforms have also been associated with being prim and proper, which is connected to prep schools and upper middle class to wealthy economic statuses because uniforms cost money. By customizing a symbol of authority, young Cruella is taking the power and seriousness away from the school authority that issued the uniform. Cruella does somewhat maintain this pattern of irreverence throughout the movie. She defies the Liberty shop manager by redesigning the window display because he put her in a custodial position rather than a designer or clerk position she wanted and asked for. Cruella also gatecrashes the Baroness's galas, at first to steal her adoptive mom's necklace, but then to steal the Baroness's lifetime of fame and pride in her fashion house. Cruella interrupts the seriousness of these elite authorities when she shows that another fashion style exists. But here lies the issue. The impact of Cruella's rebellion isn't seen in a broader scale. It's more personal. People's styles after Cruella's show are pretty much the same. Even though there are headlines shown that say Cruella's shaking up the fashion world, I had a hard time believing it when I didn't see the results. So Cruella's impact, it then seems like, is just contained in the fashion industry and just for fame in general, which is closed off to society at large. This limited impact is the antithesis or opposite of the societal impact that the punk subculture had. Cruella, as we find out later, is also a part of the aristocracy because the Baroness is later revealed to be her biological mother. This is where the irreverence and punk ends and the resubscription to wealth, fame, and aristocracy begins. It's not Cruella's aristocracy that makes her not punk. It's the fact that Cruella's vengeance doesn't extend beyond the personal, and that she doesn't use her newfound aristocracy in a socially impactful way. For example, she doesn't take in designers who've been rejected by the Baroness or do anything concrete with her newfound wealth. Punk is a community that grows through social connections as detailed in Moran's research. And yet, the movie fails to show that because Cruella only focuses on herself and her vengeance. In a Vulture article by Angela Jade Bastien, she writes, "If you look closely, Cruella is indicative of the very culture it pretends to critique. Its central character is a white woman whose concerns and politics begin and end with herself. She's a girl boss pretending to fight against the powers that be. She doesn't want to overthrow the establishment so much as become it." And we see Cruella embracing her wealth and aristocratic sensibilities when she decides to live in Hell Hall, the Baroness's former home, and the movie ends at that. Cruella just reclaims the privilege she was granted, being born as an heir to a noble. To me, the punk thing to do would have been to either reject the wealth or spread it to other up-and-coming punk designers. But since we didn't see any of that or any of the punk community at large, the statement the movie ends up making is that if somebody was born great, into privilege, and it was taken away, they'll find means to get it back. Instead of the punk principle of working with the community to shape your own future and assist the underprivileged. Punk, as it got older, may have become as a means of self-expression. But why then set a movie at the peak of the punk revolution in the 70s if there's no actual revolution that's gonna go on? It just feels like this movie's punk is all bark and no bite. Because of all of that, the movie is just co-opting punk aesthetics and not its core rebellious principles. Did I expect the movie to be better than that and actually be punk? No. Was I disappointed anyway? Yes. Because so much more could have been done with Cruella. Honestly, in hindsight, the movie could have easily been punk if Cruella knew the Baroness was her mother and was rebelling against her all along. Maybe, as a mark of a true narcissistic parent, the Baroness didn't like the fact that Cruella's showing more creative potential than her, so she tries to get rid of her own daughter. But Cruella survives, is taken in by Jasper, Artie, and Horace, and vows vengeance. Doing a plotline like that would be dark, yes, but finding a community is a part of punk's ideals in rebelling against an oppressive authority, especially when dominant society rejects you. Cruella rejecting the aristocracy and choosing to remain with her chosen family also aligns with the community aspect of punk. Throughout the movie, there could also be designers that the Baroness rejects, whom Cruella recruits for her own fashion house. They can create the fashion shows with Cruella and create garments people could wear, showing Cruella's impact on the fashion and punk community and outside of it. The people could then more believably rally with Cruella in the final confrontation between her and the Baroness, showing how the community of a subculture supports each other. But getting back to my point, just using the aesthetics of a whole subculture and not caring about sticking to its principles and political standpoint is disingenuous. That's like claiming to be a part of queer culture, although being queer isn't a subculture, I'm just talking about the culture in it. That's like claiming to be a part of queer culture, slapping rainbows on merch and expecting queer people to buy it, yet hyping up a queer character in a movie only to have the queer character be aligned with the movie's villain and not even get a total of 20 minutes of screen time. Or spreading rumors of a queer character cameo in a big movie only to have said character be played by a straight director and that character be in a less than a minute blink it and you'll miss it moment, therefore not actually giving queer characters a chance to be represented in your main stage, despite claiming to be an ally to the community. Like Bastian's statement earlier kind of implied, I'm just gonna piggyback off of that thought. Disney and its investors can't really capture the essence of subcultures and nuanced intersectional politics because it is part of the dominant culture that has the wealth, fame, and influence to dictate what its fans, which are in the hundreds of millions, should deem acceptable or not. It can't really fight itself. Of course, being punk and being queer are two vastly different things, but I just used the example to illustrate how the punk quote-unquote representation in this movie is only surface level and how empty it actually is, and how impactful it could have been if only a few things were edited. Did I want it to go any deeper than that? Yes. But did I expect it to? No, not really. Look, if this company can colossally mess up the big cultural references in Mulan, of course they'd mess up the subculture they used in Cruella. Which is a shame because they had all the resources in the world to research the principles of punk, if they cared to do that. But they didn't.
What inspired you to build a second Krusty Krab right next door to the original?
Money!
All of these reasons are why I didn't enjoy Cruella in a narrative sense, because the narrative falls apart, especially when we looked at its supposed anti-capitalist punk themes, which turned into a letdown and actually returned to its aristocratic, rich girl boss business. And it wasn't much of a big fashion moment for me because while I liked some of the costumes, they just feel separate from the story versus a costume telling Cruella's story. But that sort of analysis is a video for fashion channels or artists to tackle. Again, this is my take on Cruella. My analysis and opinions are my own. I guess I wanted a subculture to be represented to a greater potential here because subcultures are so important to diversifying our societies and examining whether the dominant ideologies we're being subscribed to are helping us grow for the better or not. But again, because Disney is part of the dominant culture, I guess I shouldn't expect them to critique themselves, you know? Since it's Pride Month, I'll be leaving links to a few LGBTQ plus organizations centered in the US, Canada, and the UK to donate to if you can, or to go to if you need any resources. As always, I've been Fiction Fixer, analyzing fiction for you. If you like my video, please like and subscribe for more videos in the future, or so you can tune in for more videos.